I remember the first time I heard her voice through the thin walls of my apartment. Soft, low, almost cracked, like someone whispering to themselves. But that night was different. She wasn't whispering. She was crying. I don't even know what made me knock. Maybe it was the way her sobs kept stopping, like she was trying to hold herself together and failing. Maybe it was because, for weeks, I'd been catching her in passing, in the hallway, by the mailboxes, and every time she smiled, it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. When she opened the door, her hair was pulled back, loose strands framing her face. She had this oversized sweater draped over her, the sleeves falling past her hands, and her eyes, red, tired, but still sharp, locked on mine. "What do you want?" she asked. Her voice wasn't harsh, not really. It was raw, like she'd stopped pretending. "I heard you," I said, my hand still braced on the doorframe. "I just wanted to check if you're okay." For a second, she didn't move, just stared at me like she was trying to figure out if I was real. Then she stepped aside and nodded toward the quiet apartment. Inside, it smelled faintly of vanilla and wine, the kind of mix that shouldn't work but somehow did. The lights were dim, soft. There was an empty glass on the coffee table, and her phone face down beside it. "I'm fine," she said, her voice quieter now, less certain. But when I turned, she wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the floor, her arms crossed like she was trying to hold herself together. And something in me, something I didn't think, didn't plan, just moved. I stepped closer, close enough to smell the hint of her perfume under the wine. Close enough that when she finally looked up, her eyes met mine, and neither of us blinked. That's when she said it. "I'm lonely," she whispered, almost like a confession. Then louder, broken, "I'm lonely at 52. It hung there, sharp and heavy, filling every inch of that quiet room. I didn't know what to say. My mouth opened, but nothing came out. And then she stepped in, closing the gap between us until the sleeve of her sweater brushed against my hand. "You can fix that," she said, softer now, but with a tremor that made my chest tighten. Her eyes didn't waver. Neither did mine. I could feel my pulse in my throat, in my hands, everywhere. The world outside, the hum of cars on the street, the muffled music from a neighbor's TV. All of it faded until there was just her, close enough that I could see the small crease between her brows, the way her lips parted just slightly as she waited. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare. Then, a sharp knock rattled the doorframe behind me. She flinched. So did I. The moment broke, but only just. Because even as she stepped back, even as my stomach twisted with the sudden jolt of reality, her hand brushed mine again. Quick, deliberate, like a promise she hadn't spoken yet. And in that quiet second, before either of us turned to see who was at the door, I knew this wasn't the end of it. Not by a long shot. The knock at the door faded into nothing, some delivery meant for the neighbor across the hall, but the spell had already shifted. She didn't say anything as she closed it, just pressed the latch and leaned against it for a moment, her shoulders rising and falling like she was steadying herself. I stood there in her living room, not sure if I should leave, not sure if I even could. When she finally turned around, her expression had softened. No smile, just that quiet, tired look that somehow pulled me closer than a grin ever could. "Sorry," she murmured, brushing at her hair though it didn't need it. "I shouldn't have said that." "You don't have to be sorry," I said. Her gaze lingered on me for a beat, like she was weighing something. Then she moved toward the kitchen, her sweater swaying around her hips. "Do you want coffee?" I didn't, but I said yes anyway. The kitchen was small, dimly lit by the under-cabinet light. She moved around it with an ease that made me hyper-aware of everything. The way her hand curled around the mug handle, the soft hum under her breath when she reached for the sugar, the faint perfume that clung to her like memory. I wanted to say something, about the way she'd looked at me, about how none of this felt neighborly, but the words stayed locked in my throat. Instead, I asked, "Do you ever talk to anyone about it? The loneliness?" She froze, just for a moment, her back to me. Then, carefully, "I used to. My sister. Sometimes a friend. But people get tired of hearing the same story. And eventually, you stop telling it." I swallowed, leaning against the counter, trying to look anywhere but at her reflection in the window above the sink. "What story?" I asked. She set the mug down in front of me. Her hand brushed mine, deliberately or not. I couldn't tell. That I married young. That he left. That I raised 2 kids who barely call now. Because they're busy living their lives. She hesitated, fingers curling around her own mug like she needed the warmth. That sometimes I wake up and realize an entire week passed, and I didn't say more than a handful of words to anyone. I didn't know what to do with the ache that settled in my chest. You deserve more than that, I said quietly. Her eyes flicked up to mine. There was something sharp there, like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the fight. You're too young to say things like that, she whispered, but there was no venom in it, just a soft kind of sadness. The age gap hung there, invisible but heavy. It was the thing neither of us said out loud, but both of us felt. Every time her gaze lingered too long or mine dropped too low. I wrapped my hands around the coffee cup, more for something to do than because I wanted it. I don't feel young when I'm here, I said, surprising myself. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped closer until the edge of the counter barely separated us. Her hand came up, almost hesitantly, resting on my shoulder, light, like she could still take it back. But she didn't. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Just felt the weight of her touch, the way her thumb brushed against the seam of my shirt like it was accidental, though we both knew better. Her breath was warm when she finally spoke, low enough that it barely carried. You should go, she said. But her hand didn't leave my shoulder. And when I finally did step back, when I walked to the door and felt her eyes on me the entire way, there was no mistaking what had shifted between us. It wasn't neighborly anymore. It hadn't been for a while. The first time it almost happened, it wasn't planned. I'd come over to help her with a leaky faucet. Something simple, something harmless. At least, that's what I told myself. The kitchen smelled like coffee and fresh soap. The counter wiped clean except for a folded towel. She was barefoot, hair tied up, that loose sweater again hanging off one shoulder like it had been made just for her. Under the sink, she said, pointing with the mug in her hand. It keeps dripping. Drove me crazy all night. I crouched down, tools in hand, pretending like my hands weren't shaking from something that had nothing to do with plumbing. She stayed close, too close. Every time I glanced up, her legs were just there, the hem of her jeans brushing her ankles, her toes curling slightly against the tile. Do you always help your neighbors like this? She teased. I smirked, tightening the wrench, though my chest felt too tight. Only the ones worth helping. The silence after that stretched, heavier than it should have been. When I finally stood, wiping my hands on the towel, she was closer than before. Too close. Her mug hung forgotten at her side. Her eyes locked on me like she couldn't decide if she wanted to take a step forward or back. I didn't breathe. Neither did she. Then, the sharp ding of her phone from the counter. She blinked, like someone had splashed water over her, and turned to grab it. I caught the name flashing across the screen. A man's name. Her thumb hesitated over the screen before she set the phone face down without answering. My mouth opened, to ask, to say something, but she cut me off, her voice quieter now. Don't what? Don't look at me like that. There was no bite to it. Just a raw, fragile plea. I swallowed hard, my hands tightening around the towel. Maybe I can't help it. Her breath caught. I heard it, soft but sharp. And then she moved. Not much, just a step, but enough that the air between us changed. I didn't think. My hand brushed hers, light, tentative, but she didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled, not around mine, not holding, but enough to tell me she felt it too. The world outside went quiet. Someone could see, she whispered, eyes flicking toward the window though the blinds were shut. No one's looking, I murmured. She looked up at me then, really looked, and for a heartbeat I thought. But she turned, stepping away, her back to me, her shoulders tight. This is wrong, she said, barely more than a breath. Maybe, I admitted. Neither of us moved for what felt like forever. The clock ticked. The faucet dripped, once quiet. Then, slowly, she turned back. And God, the look in her eyes. It wasn't anger, or fear, or even shame. It was something deeper. She didn't touch me, not this time. But when I left, when I stood at her door with the handle under my palm, her voice stopped me. Tomorrow, she said. Just that. Not a question. Not a promise. And when I finally walked back to my apartment, my pulse still racing, I knew it didn't matter how wrong this was. Because tomorrow, I'd be back. And she'd be waiting. It was raining that night. Not a soft drizzle. A steady, unrelenting downpour that blurred the streetlights and turned the pavement into a mirror. I'd been pacing my apartment for an hour before I gave in. before I found myself standing at her door, knuckles hovering just inches from the wood, soaked through from the walk across the courtyard. When she opened it, her eyes widened, surprise first, then something sharper, something that made my chest ache. "You're drenched," she said, stepping back instinctively to let me in. The apartment was dim, quiet except for the hum of the rain against the windows. She moved toward the kitchen for a towel, muttering something about how I was going to catch a cold. "I don't care," I said, my voice rougher than I meant. She stopped mid-step. Slowly, she turned, holding the towel, but not moving closer. "Then why are you here?" I didn't have an answer that made sense. Not one that didn't sound insane. So I told her the truth, the only truth that mattered. "Because I can't." My throat tightened, my hands flexing uselessly at my sides. "I can't stop thinking about you." The towel slipped from her fingers, landing silently on the floor. She didn't speak, didn't blink. And then she crossed the space between us, slow but sure, until the tips of her toes brushed mine. Her sweater sleeve brushed against the back of my hand, and I swear my pulse roared in my ears. "This is dangerous," she whispered, but her voice trembled. "I don't care," I said again, softer this time, like an apology and a plea. Her eyes searched mine, desperate and afraid, and something else entirely. Then her hand came up, hesitated, and finally touched my face. Just her fingertips at first, cool and tentative, tracing the line of my jaw like she was memorizing it. I leaned into her palm, just enough to let her know I wanted her to. Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the room felt impossibly small. "Do you know what you're doing to me?" she whispered, her voice breaking in a way that made my chest tighten. "Probably the same thing you're doing to me," I murmured. The words hung between us, heavy and electric. I reached up, gently tucking a damp strand of hair behind her ear. My knuckles brushed the warmth of her skin, and she shivered, not from the cold, not from the rain. "Tell me to go," I said, though I prayed she wouldn't. She didn't. Instead, she stepped closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating from her, the faint tremor in her hands where they hovered just shy of my chest. And then her forehead rested against mine, soft, tentative, unbearably intimate. "This will ruin everything," she breathed. "Then let it," I whispered. The silence stretched, taut and dangerous. Her lips parted, her breath warm against my mouth. My hand found the small of her back, steadying her, holding her, kneading her closer than close. And just as the distance between us shrank to nothing, a sharp, insistent knock shattered the moment. We froze. Her eyes snapped toward the door, panic flashing there, but she didn't step away, didn't let me go. The knock came again, louder this time. And all I could think, with her breath still mingling with mine, her hands still trembling where they almost held me, was that whoever was on the other side had no idea how close they were to finding us undone. The knocking stopped, but the damage was done. She pulled away first, slow, reluctant, her hand slipping from my chest like it weighed 100 pounds. I didn't move. Couldn't. My body still hummed with the nearness of her, with everything we'd almost done, and the sudden absence of it burned like frost. She crossed the room without a word, picking up the towel from the floor with a stiffness that didn't belong to her. Her sweater shifted with every step, revealing the curve of her shoulder, the faint tension in her neck. I swallowed hard, my hands flexing uselessly at my sides. "Who was that?" "Doesn't matter," she said, her voice steady but too sharp to be true. "It matters," I said. That made her turn. Slowly, her eyes met mine, and in them was something I couldn't place: fear, anger, guilt. Maybe all of it tangled together. "It was my ex," she finally said, each word careful, controlled. "He still checks in. Sometimes." The silence that followed felt heavy, suffocating. I didn't know what to do with the ache in my chest, the sharp, irrational sting of jealousy I had no right to feel. "Are you?" My voice cracked, and I had to start again. "Are you still with him?" Her laugh was sharp and humorless. "No. God, no." "But," she hesitated, her hand gripping the back of the chair like she needed something to hold her up. "He doesn't like letting go. And I don't know how to tell him to stop." I should have felt relief. Instead, all I could think about was the way her hands trembled when she said it, the way her voice softened like she was apologizing for something she didn't need to. "You don't owe him anything," I said, stepping closer before I could stop myself. She looked up at me then, eyes wide, shining in the dim light. "And what do I owe you?" The question hit harder than I expected. I froze, just a foot away, close enough to see the faint rise and fall of her chest, the way her lips pressed together like she was trying to hold something back. "You don't owe me anything," I said, softer now, almost pleading. The words tangled in my throat, thick and clumsy. But she understood anyway. I saw it in the way her shoulders loosened, the way her gaze softened even as she stepped back, putting that thin line of distance between us again. "This isn't simple," she whispered, almost to herself. "No," I said, my voice barely more than a breath. "It's not." For a moment, neither of us moved. The rain outside had softened, just a light patter now, and the quiet inside her apartment felt too loud. Then she moved, brushing past me toward the window, her arm grazing mine as she passed. A touch so light it felt accidental, but lingered like fire all the same. She stood there, staring out into the night, her silhouette sharp against the glow of the street lamp beyond the glass. "You should stay away from me," she said finally, her voice breaking just enough to betray her. My heart twisted, but my feet didn't move. "I can't," I admitted. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It pulsed, thick with everything we hadn't said, everything we'd almost done. When she finally turned back, her eyes found mine, steady and unflinching. "Then don't," she said. There was no hesitation this time, no half-step backward to keep the distance safe. Just those two words, soft but sure, like a line we both knew we were about to cross. And in that moment, standing in her quiet apartment with the rain easing outside and my pulse hammering in my throat, I knew there was no going back. Not for either of us. The apartment was too quiet. Not the soft kind of quiet, but the kind that hummed in your ears, thick and heavy, like it was waiting for something to break. She stood by the window, her arms crossed loosely, eyes on the wet street below. I stayed near the door, like maybe if I didn't move, the moment wouldn't tilt into something we couldn't undo. But it already had. I took a slow step forward, then another. She didn't turn, didn't flinch. The rain outside had stopped completely, leaving only the faint drip of water from the gutters, steady and rhythmic, like a clock counting down. "Say something," I murmured, my voice low, almost hoarse. She breathed in sharply, like my voice had startled her, but still didn't look at me. "If I do," she whispered, "we won't be able to take it back." I was close enough now to see the faint tremor in her shoulders, the way her fingers gripped her arms as if she was holding herself in place. "Maybe I don't want to take it back," I said. That made her turn, slowly, like she was afraid to see what would be on my face. Her eyes met mine, searching, almost desperate. And then I was in front of her, just inches away, my breath mingling with hers, the space between us so tight it ached. "This is wrong," she said, but her voice broke halfway through, turning the words into a plea she didn't really believe. "Then let it be wrong," I whispered, my hand hesitating before brushing a damp strand of hair behind her ear. My fingers lingered, grazing her cheek, warm and soft, trembling only slightly. Her breath caught, sharp, quiet, and for a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then she exhaled, shaky and low, and stepped closer. I felt it, the heat radiating off her, the faint press of her shoulder brushing my chest, the electric current that sparked wherever we touched. "You don't know what you're asking for," she murmured, her voice so soft it felt like it was meant only for me. "Yes," I said, my forehead almost touching hers now. "I do." The silence between us tightened until it felt ready to snap. Her hand, tentative at first, lifted and rested against my chest. Just her palm. Just enough to feel the steady thrum of my heartbeat beneath her fingers. I didn't speak. Neither did she. And then, finally, she let herself close the last inch of space, her forehead leaning against mine, her breath trembling, her body soft but tense, like she was both surrendering and bracing herself at once. "This, us," she whispered. "It's going to change everything." I swallowed hard, my voice low and certain. "I know." She stayed like that, close but not quite, her fingers curling slightly against me as though anchoring herself. And then, with a soft, shuddering breath, she let the last bit of resistance slip. Not a kiss, not yet, but her hand slid up, over my shoulder, holding on, and I understood. She wasn't asking for permission. She was giving it. And for the first time, in that quiet room that had held too many silences and almosts, We both knew there was no more running, no more pretending. Whatever this was, messy, dangerous, impossible, it was ours now. And neither of us wanted to let it go. The rain had stopped by morning, leaving the air sharp and clean. Her blinds were half open, letting in the soft light that stretched across the living room, brushing over the 2 mugs on the coffee table, one still half full, untouched. We hadn't said much after last night. We didn't need to. I'd stayed, not out of some plan, but because when she'd sat down on the couch, silent and trembling, I'd sat beside her. And when her hand had found mine, hesitant at first, then tighter, warmer, neither of us had let go. Now, she stood by the window, her sweater loose around her shoulders, hair falling in soft waves she hadn't bothered to tame. She looked like herself, the guarded, graceful woman I'd first noticed in the hallway, but lighter somehow, like she'd finally let something go. "You're quiet," I said, my voice still rough from sleep. She glanced over her shoulder, lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile, but close enough. "So are you." I got up, crossing the space between us until I was standing just behind her. The light caught the faint lines around her eyes, the curve of her cheek, and for the first time, I realized how much I didn't care about the numbers or the years between us. "I was thinking," I said. She raised a brow, eyes on the street below. "Dangerous." "Maybe." I hesitated, then slid my arms around her waist, slow enough to give her room to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Instead, she leaned back into me, her body fitting against mine like it had been waiting for this. "And," she prompted, her voice softer now. "And," I murmured, my chin brushing her hair, "I don't care what anyone thinks. Not anymore." She stilled for a moment, then exhaled, the tension in her shoulders loosening under my hands. "They'll talk," she said quietly. "Let them," I said, my lips close to her temple. "They don't know you. They don't know us." Her hand came up, resting over mine where it clasped her waist. Her thumb brushed my skin, a small, quiet gesture that felt bigger than words. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of you. Of this. Of wanting something I shouldn't." I turned her gently, until she was facing me, until I could see the way her eyes shimmered in the morning light. "And now," her gaze didn't waver, "now I just want you to stay." For a moment, neither of us moved. The world outside was waking up, a car door slamming, a dog barking, the hum of a neighbor's television, but inside, it was just us. I reached up, brushing her hair back, letting my thumb rest against her cheek. "Then I'll stay," I said. Simple, certain. She leaned into my touch, closing her eyes for a beat, and when she opened them again, there was no fear left there, just something softer, steadier. We didn't kiss, not right away. Instead, I pulled her closer, holding her the way I'd wanted to since that first night, when I'd knocked on her door and heard the quiet in her voice. Her forehead rested against my chest, and my arms wrapped around her, anchoring us. And for the first time, it didn't feel dangerous. It didn't feel wrong. It just felt like the truth. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?